basically telling the editor, here it comes. This way just a little bit. And tilt the board down some. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You didn't say marker.
Oh,
Second sticks.
marker.
Perfect. Thank you. So, good job, man.
Okay, Dreyfus talks a lot about moods and the fact that we don't say that he thinks that there is we do have an understanding of the phenomena when we say that we are in a mood instead of saying the mood is in us, and that when we have a practice of a great game or a great meal, somehow we have this shared mood that is not necessarily residing in our heads as an idea, but is in the room. How does that work?
Well, if you go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the traditional philosophical way of understanding the world and thinking of kind of inside subjective stuff, thoughts inside of us, and then facts, objects out in the world, right? That one thing that way of thinking about the world does is it makes all sorts of things inside of us, like moods, emotions, right? Those are kind of subjective things that we project out on the world, onto things. So you want to say the world's not happy or sad, we're happy and sad, and we project our happiness out onto the world. When this phenomenological tradition started to undercut the distinction between subjects and objects, what that did was allowed us to, in a much more natural way, make room for moods, emotions to be out in the world. And I think this matches our common sense way of talking about it. So we talk about the mood in the room. Right? There was a happy mood as we walked into the party, or the mood of the nation is downcast right now, or depressed as a nation. I think that's capturing something real about our experience of the world and the way that the world isn't just these sort of neutral facts, but that it lines up in particular ways. It's illuminated in particular ways, and when we get in the right mood, it's a way of getting in tune with the world so that it can show certain features to us. So when you're happy, the world looks different. And it's not just that you're interpreting the world through a different filter, but it's that your happiness tunes you into features of the world that you weren't paying attention to. If you're suspicious, then suddenly all sorts of things become salient, right? Your lover's behavior, hanging up the phone quickly when you walk into the room, that becomes a salient feature when you're suspicious of her. Why is that? Well, the mood it's tuning you in. It's getting you in touch with the world in a different way than you would be without the mood.
But still, obviously, this stuff happens in our heads, right? So that's what I always have trouble explaining this, because obviously those emotions are caused by, not only caused by brain activity, but it does happen as much as we know, insofar as we know, in our heads, right? So what's wrong with saying, like, I'm in a suspicious, what would be wrong if the language was, the suspicious mood is in my head, not I'm in a suspicious mood, and I walk into the room, and because I have suspicions in my head, that's why I'm projecting the importance of the way you hung up the phone. I mean, what's wrong with looking at it in that way? It seems more commonsensical in a way. It's hard to understand it the other way.
Well, moods don't happen without our heads, right? But that doesn't mean they happen in our heads. The analogy I like to use is a radio, right? A radio gets tuned into different radio stations, and as you turn the dial, you get different songs playing on the radio. That doesn't mean the stations are all inside the radio. It just means that without the radio getting tuned to them, you're not in a position to pick them up. I think moods work the same way. That, of course, without the sort of bodies we have and the brains we have, we wouldn't be in a position to respond to the world through moods. But that doesn't mean that everything the mood is picking up on is somehow created by us or projected by us.
Perfect answer. Now, what about the importance importance of risk, not only to master a skill. Dreyfus says, we need to take risks. We can't just play by the rules. There's something beyond that. And if we don't take those risks, even on the upper levels of who we are and our identities, and it doesn't. A risk-free existence doesn't seem to be as rich as one that we're willing to go out on a limb for what we want to be doing and what the skills we want to master and our relationships with what matter to us.
I think on Dreyfus's model, risks are important because once you understand what he's saying, you see that rules only take us so far. Right? The rules will get you to recognize certain generalized responses to general situations, but to really become a master, to become one of those people who isn't just doing what everybody else does, but is responding just precisely to what the situation requires, you have to leave the rules behind. And that means you have to take risks. You have to do something that the rules don't tell you to do so that you can start to learn to get tuned into the particular features of the situation. So the willingness to take risks is a very important stage in moving beyond just competence in following the rules and doing what everyone else does, to getting into the position where you learn what you're supposed to be responding to, what the particular features of the situation want you to respond to. And I think you're right that in addition to the fact that you can't ever get beyond a rule-governed behavior without taking risks, there's also a kind of exhilaration or joy in human existence, leaving the rules behind, going out on the edge, letting the world show something new to them, and teaching ourselves how to respond differently to the world. The risk takers are the ones who disclose new worlds, disclose new ways to be human, new ways to behave, discover new things about the world.
So it seems that we've moved from an ideal of a human being in Plato's time, and the tradition would say the ideal human is detached, rational, an observer of the world, a thinker about the world. And now we've brought in all these elements about the opposite of that. I mean, we're not detached, we're involved, we're not, we're passionate, and we require that involvement and passion and risk in order to not only to have meaning subjectively, but in order to be good at things and in order to become masters. Is that, would you say that's right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I suspect that in the background there's a big difference in seeing the world. In the background of there's one ideal of this sort of detached, rational, objective way of engaging with the world, figuring out exactly what things are, what we're supposed to think about them, what the truth is, what true things we can say about them, right? Being a scientist, that's one sort of ideal. Another ideal is this ideal of the master, the risk taker, someone who's an individual, not finding out the truth that's available to everybody, but discovering their own truth, engaging with the world in their own kind of way. Those are two very different ideals, and I think they're both present in our culture. I suspect in the deep background of those ideals are two very different senses of how the world works. On the rational side, there's a notion that there's just one world, there's one set of facts, there's one ultimate truth, there's one right way to be a human, right? And emotions which show you the world differently, those are danger. You think the emotions they're not showing you a different world, they're obscuring the world. So we have to learn to be passionless, and we want to get at the one final truth. In the deep background of this other model is the sense that there's not one world, and there's not one right way to inhabit a world. There's an indefinite number of worlds, and it's wide open for discovery. And what the ideal of human existence is to just find a new world, find a new way to be human, discover something new. And moods become valuable because they show you the world in a new light. They help you discover things that other people can't see. Skills open up whole ranges of possibility for you that other people can't have. And so the skills model, I suspect, has in the deep background this sense of the world as not bound, as open. It has a sense of human existence as multiply realizable. There's not just one way to be human. And it encourages you to be creative, to be adventurous, to be an explorer.
And fantastic. Can we go back up a little bit? I think we could dwell a little longer on this idea of focal practices, and in a way, everything we've talked about so far is embodied in some way on this idea of a focal practice of some practice that we engage in where people are brought together, and why that's so important, and why in today we have to kind of actively appreciate and nurture that versus because the world seems to be fighting in another direction where these focal practices are disappearing. So can you talk a little bit about what a focal practice is, and what threatens those practices, and you've already said in other ways why it's important that we nurture them, but I think we could sum that up a little bit more.
Well, skillful practices can focus things. They can draw things together and become focal practices. And by focusing things, I mean they focus different activities, right? They draw different activities together, different things you could be doing. So again, think about making music. In the days before you had MP3 players and computers and so on, the practice of making music depended on all kinds of other human activities and human practices, and you'd have skills for playing the violin, and you'd have skills for creating a hall where music could be played, and you had skills for directing, you had skills for composing the music, and so on, and those all would come together on this moment when the music would be performed. So it was a way of focusing practices. Focal practices would also gather people, and they'd bring people together to focus on this one event. So the whole community, if they wanted to hear music, would come together, and they'd be drawn together, and they'd focus on this moment of great mastery when someone was, again, exhibiting this amazing feature of human life, that we can become skillful and disclosive and show the world in a way that most people aren't capable of doing.
And this happens also just in the basic level of just making a family dinner, right?
It can, yeah. If you're good at making dinner, it will tend to focus your family, to draw them together. If you pull it off just right, all the distractions that tend to disperse us and pull us apart will be avoided, and we'll be able to just focus on something essential about being a family, of having these loving relations and gathering together. I suspect that skillfulness, I don't think skillfulness has to focus people, but I think it has this tendency to focus people. Right? When you're very, very good at something, then it does tend to draw
It's not a
people
coincidence
together.
that a dinner from McDonald's doesn't focus the family as much as a home-cooked dinner. Right?
Well, if it's done well, right? If you're
the
good at
McDonald's
cooking,
meal
that's right.
Is almost necessarily not done well. There's this. That's what I meant by like the push and pull between the culture that's kind of fighting against. I mean, I guess in a way this does sound like the most conservative part of. You can see where Heidegger is a bit of a conservative thinker, because we have to nurture some of these traditions in order to maintain these focal practices. Otherwise, for some reason, the world with McDonald's and with everything becoming the same, and the same skills, needing the same skills to go out to a meal here. You just you go to your McDonald's and you pay $3. You know what you're ordering. You know what you're gonna get, and you can now do that all over the world, and it's exactly the same. Why is the world fighting in that direction, and what can we do to resist that?
One of the dangers of technology is it relieves us of the burden of having to develop skills. So and technology is always sold as a labor-saving device, right? when you buy the latest technology for cooking, the promise is that you can cook as well as a master without any of the skills the master has. And that goes for everything with music as well. So all of us now today can enjoy music of a quality unimaginable to most people in the history of the world in the comfort of our homes with very little cost and very little effort. That's a great promise. Who would give up on that pleasure of hearing music in that way? But the danger, so that's the great promise, but the danger is that we give in to the seductions of technology to the degree that we lose all of these skills, all right? That we become, in some senses, completely helpless, right? We're consumers. We know how to push buttons. We know how to get what we happen to want at the moment, but we're not able ourselves to really engage with the world in any sort of rich fashion. And that's the danger, and that's the risk. And so there is a conservatism involved, or a reactionary attitude involved to a lot of people who think along these lines. You look back fondly at the good old days when we didn't have technology and we actually had to develop skills and so on. I think that's not the right attitude. I think technology obviously brings incredible opportunities to us, but what we have to figure out is somehow to foster this adventurous side of human existence, this risk-taking side, foster our ability to become masters and world disclosers, and use technology to advance that cause, rather than let technology turn us into mindless, skillless drones.
Yeah, I think the good news is humans always tend to go in that direction. I always think of the DJ. Like, you think, like, okay, now you just put the record on and you can listen to it. And then pretty soon, you've got someone with 2 record players doing this incredibly skilled behavior, just playing the records. And all of a sudden, the record becomes an instrument, much like the violin was, you know? And then they start appreciating the qualities of certain record players versus others, and then mixing them in ways that haven't been done before. And so I do think that as humans, luckily, there seems to be this tendency to create skillful practices, to appreciate them, and to use them to gather people.
Yeah, well, that's the promise of technology, is that it creates opportunities for new forms of world disclosure, for new ways of engaging with the world. But it's always a double-edged sword. So as soon as technology opens up a new domain for mastery and skillfulness, the technology also instantly tries to figure out how to reduplicate that mastery without the skill, right? So take your DJ who's using records to create music in a new sort of way. I'm sure there probably is already a computer program you can run the computer program on any songs you like, and it will reduplicate that sort of skill that they develop. So I think it's something. Technology is something to be grateful for, but also something, and I don't know how to do this, frankly, but somehow we have to learn how to not be seduced by technology, to keep this drive alive, this desire alive to be humans.
And do you want to just? I think that the push emphasizing our humanity and what it is to be a human being, like wrapping this up, you know, that we aren't computers, is it's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there who just, you know, are so excited by the idea of making a computer smarter than a human, and maybe one day they will succeed. But for now, it seems like we should have a constant sense of wonder and appreciation for what we are able to do in this world, right? And in an interactive way with it, how we are part of the world, and we aren't just thinking about it and separate from it. There's this sense of the importance of involvement, I guess. I guess I'm just summing up what I've learned and I've been thinking about in this time, but if you have any other closing words on that level. And I'll see if I missed anything in my notes here too. How are we doing on time here? Let's cut for a minute.